Hello, everyone. It's Erik Roth, myself here, Shamanic astrologer, bringing you another video about the current events, what's going on in astrology, what's really happening. And there's been a lot of activity lately with Mars and Gemini back on August 20th for a 7-month journey through that sign. We have an upcoming Saturn-Uranus square that's coming into nearly its fourth exact square. There were 3 in 2021, and they've been kind of hanging around each other in a square relationship aspect, and so they're coming into nearly a fourth one. But it'll feel like Saturn Uranus square as if were an exact one, so there'll be definitely an impact on that. But today we're going to be talking about something different, which is a regular occurrence 3 or 4 times per year, and that is Mercury retrograde. Mercury retrograde in Libra and Virgo. This is episode 39 of Signs, Planets, and Stellar Rhythms. And we're going to talk about it from a shamanic astrology perspective, from the schooling of Daniel Giamario and what was once known as the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, which is now turned into the Trinity of the Ages Mystery School. Mercury retrograde is a type of aspect or a transit, if you will, that happens 3 or 4 times a year, usually 3 times a year. So it's fairly regular. So it's nothing. I know that a lot of people get alarmed about Mercury retrograde and, oh my God, when is it going to come in? When is the shadow? When is it going to go direct? Can I do anything? Or do I need to run away or not make any big moves during this time? So I'm going to share a lot about what this Mercury retrograde means, and especially concerning the signs of Libra and Virgo as that relates to it. There's also in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the Synodic cycle. I do have a slide about that, so I wanted to mention about this, as well as when Mercury goes direct and the September Equinox point and Mercury, because there's a big alignment taking place on the September Equinox, known as autumnal equinox here in the Northern Hemisphere, and the spring equinox in the Southern Hemisphere. So Mercury retrograde, Mercury is a kind of an apparent motion, just like all planets, and everything you see in the sky except for the moon and sun will, on natural objects that is, will go retrograde at a certain point, usually either once a year or every couple of years, or sometimes every year and a half. It depends on the planetary body involved here. So it's a bit different from the interpretation of Mercury retrograde is a bit different from the way others see it or other schools of thought, but there is a common thread in that. Yeah, it has that thing about, oh, does this mean that communications are going to break down, that technology is going to go haywire? Well, it can have some of that effect, and this is why it's like a polarity shift from a logical, rational place to, especially from the brain and the mind, into a greater focus on the creative, irreverent, intuitive, and emotional thinking processes. It's also about rewinding and reviewing what we've experienced. So we can think of that as well as like just reflection, introspection, meditation. And it's usually that's something that is not goes into keep going, do, progress, logic, rational thinking, let's go. This can go into a space where we go back into ourselves instead of outward, but there could be an outward expression by going back through creative outlets. The sign or signs of Mercury that is in during its retrograde period, it's an apparent backwards movement. So Mercury is catching up with the Earth, between the Sun and the Earth. So I think crosses it fairly quickly, about 10 to 11 day period. Well, it will be where we won't be able to see Mercury with the naked eye. But it can be more, this interpretation of Mercury can be more acutely felt when the archetypes involved are more generally logical or rational or practical in their expressions or essence. And certainly these two archetypes, Libra and Virgo, have a lot more of the quote rational, practical, and logical in them than, say, Gemini or Sagittarius or Aquarius. It can actually take one to other planes, kind of break it down of the practical, but also getting them to open up to other potentialities. It's vital in this Mercury retrograde transit that we have a less logical way of doing things and more creative and intuitive processes to help us in decision making, especially in bigger decisions. This doesn't mean we can't sign contracts or buy plane tickets. But it does mean we lessen our expectations around what we're doing. So we approach it through creative or imaginative thought, and instead of forcing things and pushing and pushing and pushing during a Mercury retrograde, this is more kind of an open-ended kind of a thing. But we do, we certainly have to, each and every day, we have to go to work, we have bills to pay, we have all these things that we have to do. But it's just simply being kind of loosening the threads a little bit during this time, and maybe making some time for creative expression. Maybe if you, especially, let's say you have kids, spending time with your kids and having fun, taking some time off to, especially on like a weekend or something, to really let go of the work and just focus on, recreation or art or entertainment, or maybe socializing with others. I mean, these are the kinds of activities that would be more supported. And opening up communication, being more, trying to be as clear as possible with your communication with others. That is also one thing, that communication is just kind of built into the whole Mercury, which represents the mind, communication, and thinking. It's built into that. So we have to loosen the threads around this in the sense of, like, hey, sometimes it's not going to get through, and just be patient with and not rush to judgment, if you will, on certain words or certain statements that you might think, because you're perceiving a certain way, and then it may not be the intent of the other person to say that or to be received in such a way. So these are the kinds of things that can show up in there. So this, of course, we've got Libra and Virgo, and with ties into the September equinox. And it's interesting because Mercury has a conjunction with Venus during this time, and it spends 11 days with Venus in the underworld. So that's how long it's basically spending, because Venus is, let's see, looking at this, Venus officially goes into the underworld on the 14th of September. So it really is like 10 to 11 days or so that it's in that space, because Mercury doesn't really go into that realm until the 17th of September. I'll talk about what all of that is as we go along here. But some of the interpretation, just on a basic level, this can be about reviewing relationships, especially in how we communicate in them and in sacred space. It is an opening of the mind to a deeper, more intuitive mindfulness of our identity in relation to the other. And what I mean by the other is the other around us, our partners, our friends, family, but also in some cases, the other within. Mercury is not necessarily representative of the inner beloved, but it can relate to that, especially with Libra and looking at ourselves and our own, maybe what we were projecting onto others. Okay, the retrograde period is from September 9 through October 2. And it can sometimes be retrograde 4 times a year, but more often than not, it's 3 times. And about half of that retrograde period is when Mercury is not visible to the naked eye. So it can be visible maybe to telescopes, but to the naked eye, it's usually disappeared for half that time. So it starts off here in in the evening time, the beginning of the retrograde. So that's where Mercury is currently. And stations retrograde at 8 degrees 55 minutes Libra, disappears into the underworld at 5 degrees 20 minutes Libra. That means it gets into the glare of the sun. Mercury then conjuncts the sun on September 22nd at 0 degrees 14 minutes Libra, which is basically just hours after the equinox. Then it re-enters the sign of Virgo, which it was in over the summertime, in summer northern hemisphere, August, and the winter time in the southern hemisphere. And then 3 days later, Mercury conjuncts Venus at 26 degrees 47 minutes Virgo. This is one of 3 conjunctions between Mercury and Venus in this period, not in the retrograde period, but in this Venus, while Venus is in the underworld and while it's coming out of the underworld. So this happens again in between September and December. September 28th, Mercury then becomes visible again in the early morning sky, still kind of hanging around Venus, but Venus is, of course, not visible at that time. It's just on the edge of visibility. And then October 2nd, Mercury stations direct at 24 degrees 11 minutes. Now, there is what some people refer to as the shadow period. This means that where Mercury, before it entered Libra, if it got to 24 degrees 11 minutes, it's kind of in the period where it would go back in direct. So you have a few weeks on each end of the Mercury retrograde. And then if you combine that with the 2 other retrograde periods, then you can get, instead of 9 or 10 weeks of, what people might judge as retrograde, but you can end up having, maybe up to 15, 16 weeks of the shadow period. And that's really like an overload of that. It's like a lot of a big portion of the year. So the shadow doesn't mean that it's the same as the retrograde. It just means that there could be like some early indications of retrograde or feeling retrograde in currently in your life. But even when Mercury is retrograde and we're reviewing things, we're having introspection, it's there could be communication issues. There's more of a review of our life and our communications over the last few weeks and what we're saying, what we're doing. It doesn't mean that things are going to be completely falling apart here. This is just a chance, an opportunity to go into different ways of being, of thinking, and instead of locked in all the time, fixed on one thing, it's kind of a chance for us to kind of open up a little bit more in different ways. So retrograde doesn't mean bad. It does not, in Shamanic astrology perspective, it does not mean bad, but it means it's just a time to have a different kind of an awareness in our lives. So in the evening sky, here it is on September 9th, 2022, we can see Mercury here, and this yellow line, this yellow symbol is Mercury, but this yellow line here, yellow-orange, that's the ecliptic. That's where the path of the sun is. And this area is that equinox point. And there's a little star here called Savijado, which I'm going to talk about towards the end when I talk about Mercury direct. But this is where Mercury is. Obviously, it's expanded to show you that marker a little more strongly here in this video. But it's a little hard to see even now because it's below the ecliptic and because of the angle of the sun in which it's setting. You got to have a really, really nice, clear vision of the horizon without any mountains or trees to be able to pick out Mercury in the evening sky currently before it goes retrograde. And even after retrograde, it starts to really descend pretty quickly. So, only 8 days after that it disappears in the glare of the sun. So you want to, catch it when you can if you have a clear horizon there. But it's in the Priestess constellation here. And here's the Lion. That's currently where the sun is at as far as September 9th. So Mercury has, like all planets, it has a synodic cycle. And from a shamanic astrology perspective, the synodic cycles are measured to begin and end when Mercury stations direct. This phase of the cycle Mercury is currently in is partly a Hermes phase and partly a synthesis and metamorphosis phase. Now, this would be a longer topic to talk about, but everyone's born in one part of a synodic cycle of Mercury, just as they're born in a synodic cycle of Venus or Mars. And that also, for each individual, is another layer to one's emerging mind and thinking and communication, along with the element of Mercury, the house position that what Mercury was in when you were born, the sign, and of course there's something called an overtone or overstory of Mercury, which in this case it began all the way back on June 3rd when Mercury last went direct in the sign of Taurus. So now it's shifting from Taurus to Virgo by the end of this synodic cycle. So again, this is a separate subject altogether, but I wanted to mention it in its as part of the Mercury retrograde. And maybe I'll do just a short video, just describing a summary of a larger summary of the synodic cycle of Mercury. But at the there is at the Turning the Ages Mystery School a course about synodic cycles, and it would include Mercury, and it can take hours to go into that and explain. All right, let's talk about the September equinox, because this is part of the Mercury expression. This is really a big one. So the equinox is roughly equal day, equal night everywhere on the planet, and the Earth normally most of the year it is tilted, and so it's when it's not tilted, it's only 2 days of the year when it isn't tilted at all in any degree, and that's on the September and the March equinoxes. So to have equal day and equal night, you have to know the sun has to be perfectly timed at a particular point on the equinox, it's usually like at sunrise or sunset, when you can get equal day and equal night where you are. But it can vary by a few seconds or a minute or two, or longer, depending on if you've got like mountains, or if it's really cloudy or rainy, you may not have as much daylight, in the sense of like it might not feel like you've got that much equal day, equal night. But that's the general thing. Equinox means equal night, equal parts there. Astrologically, the sun is entering the sign of Libra, so we call it zero Libra, and the season of relationships is its emphasis, conscious equal partnerships. It's symbol of being more conscious in any given relationship. It is important to have greater awareness of our communications with others and understanding understanding the needs of others. So that is the seasonal or temporal, meaning time, awareness of Libra. So synchronous equinox and the Sun-Mercury conjunction. So 5 hours and 46 minutes after the September equinox, on the 22nd of September, Mercury retrogrades into a conjunction with the Sun at 00 degrees, 14 minutes Libra. This is an unusually closely timed in conjunction with the Sun at an equinox point. So I've got 3 prior occurrences where Mercury came close to its conjunction with the Sun in and around the September equinox. And the closest one was in 1985, when Mercury was direct, not retrograde, when it was direct, and it conjuncted the Sun almost exactly where it's going to be conjuncting the Sun on the 22nd this year. You're in 2022, only 1 minute off. And that happened about 7 hours prior to the September equinox. So Mercury was catching up to the Sun in that way, in the sky. But the last time this happened with Mercury retrograde, and the closest appearance, was 1976, when Mercury retrograde was conjunct the Sun at 29:10 Virgo. So that was just less than a day prior to the September equinox. So pretty darn close. I mean, this is really, when you get into that area there, I mean, this is, you go back that far, that's 46 years there. So that's another actually it relates to a larger cycle. A person can have what we call Mercury return cycles, and 46 is one of those where they can actually Mercury can come back to its original position right around a person's solar return or birthday. So that's why that number kind of sticks out there. So ages 6 and 7, or years of 6 and 7, interchangeably, they kind of offset every time through the pattern. That's also times where you could have a Mercury return. Venus and Mars returns as well. I mean, all planets have quote returns, but Mercury, I would say, more often than not, is the more frequent, since it kind of zips around a lot faster than Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and so forth. All right, so here's a chart, what it looks like on the Mercury-Sun conjunction at 0014 degrees while Mercury's retrograde. You can see Venus is 8 degrees, about 8 degrees away. So the reason it's called the underworld is because when a visible planet is hidden in the glare of the sun, it symbolizes its journey in the underworld. And this is how many cultures, ancient cultures, perceived it. In this sense, the mind of Libra and Virgo are journeying through the underworld in a seasonal transition. The mysteries of life's patterns and the relationships are more deeply set. If a person has any personal points planets in the degrees of Virgo and early degrees of Libra, this would be personally impactful. So there could be a process of metamorphosis and synthesis along with the transformation that's taking place there in the person's mind, especially if they are having any personal points or planets in that area, or if they're perhaps in a Mercury return. This could be something that you definitely want to pay attention to in your own personal life, is what's going on there. Just a note, I want to point out something on this, is Saturn here and Uranus here, and they are now within 1 degree certainly by September 9th, they're actually within 1 degree, right at the time when Mercury stations retrograde. Mercury and Saturn get within, Saturn and Uranus get within 1 degree. Mercury's down here, kind of well, not quite a trine or an inconjunct, but it's kind of way off center on that. But it forms an interesting relationship between Saturn and Uranus here in this particular expression. But that'll be, I would point out for people to go and look for my Saturn Uranus video, which I've done, and I may do like an update to that, or certainly maybe I'll write an article about that, because there's a lot that's going on with Saturn Uranus. And if you go to my Facebook page and Instagram, I actually posted about this a few days ago, I think August 31st, and in my Inspiral Nexus page. So you can check that out and read more about that. But I'm hoping to write more and talk more about that particular square alignment there. So more about this Mercury-Sun conjunction at equinox. So this means that the astrological meaning of the equinox itself is altered by Mercury's retrograde position right there. There's greater emphasis on the mental expressions of Libra, and shortly after, the following day, Virgo as well, because on September 23rd, Mercury moves into Virgo, retrograde style. And then the mental expressions bring in a focus on the intuitive, imaginative, emotional ways of communicating, perceiving, and thinking. So when we combine Libra and Virgo into this, we think of sacred relationships of sovereignty in any given individual, along with being in the spirit of conscious equal versions of relationships and partnerships, including any kind of relationships, romantic, professional, friendships, community-based, and so forth. So this is, communication being a real key here, as well as sovereignty and sacredness. So when you bring in those words into that space, where are you in your own life? Are you sovereign unto yourself? And how is your communication with others? Is it open? Is it can you listen to the other person? Are you honoring the other person in what you're sharing, and are they as well with you? These are things that can be asked of within yourself and practiced during this time, and really maybe seeding for the future for all time. But this is especially pertinent during this time. Mercury stationing direct. Well, okay. On October 2nd, this is where Mercury is. As I mentioned, there's this star called Zavijava. Now, while the sun is relatively close to Mercury and the star, you may not be able to see it until later in the year. But Mercury will be in the morning time, early morning, but it's right on this ecliptic here, this orangish yellow line. And so this means that there's a greater chance to see it. And in fact, a story about 4 years ago, I was at a retreat in Mercy Hot Springs in California, and Mercury was in conjunction with, or very near, Regulus, and the waning crescent moon. So it was like the day before it went into new moon. And at this retreat, we got up super early in the morning to go and do a ceremony at the sunrise. And so I got to witness Mercury, Regulus, and the crescent moon all rise up in a row before the sun. And that was absolutely beautiful and sacred. And Regulus happens to be right here at 0 degrees Virgo. So it plays a role in that expression. It's actually, like in 2011, it moved into that sign of Virgo. In fact, I think this particular line is needs to be adjusted. It's actually, Virgo starts essentially where the star Regulus is right here, but this whole area here is the sign of Virgo. So signs and constellations are not the same. And then down here is where Libra begins. And then there's this other constellation up here called, to the right, called Hydra. And there just gives you a better idea of where these stars are in relation to the sign. But this definitely needs to be adjusted there. I was playing around with that earlier before I made this video, so I didn't fully put it back in its place. But just as a side note, they're called precession of the equinox. This is due to the wobble of the Earth. It takes 26,000 years to complete, but after 72 years, the sky shifts it looks like it shifts 1 degree, and that's due to the equinox and solstice points shifting, because of that. Earth is the thing that's actually moving, not the star background, but it looks like it's shifting that way. So this September equinox point here, which is 0 Libra in the priestess, it's moving toward the lion. So we're in the sort of the early stages of that space between the priestess and the lion from the September equinox point. So that is where Mercury happens to be stationing direct. And we could even say on a larger cosmic scale, it's, also activating those energies of that precession point. All right, so the whole of this Mercury retrograde transit through the signs of Libra and Virgo is really the main tone here. But the new tone that comes out after this, or the overstory, is going to be Virgo. About 2/3 of the time, Mercury is in the sign of Libra and the rest is in Virgo. Excuse me. But when Mercury stations direct, a new Mercury synodic cycle begins as the old one ends. The station direct point is near the star Zavijava. So that's a star that has been known by many cultures. And in fact, some look at it as the star that represents one of the wings of the priestess. Like some portray it as kind of almost an angelic type figure holding a shaft of grain. But what it really is that could be like a variant of it, but it's a priestess type figure that is deeply connected to the sacred rhythms and patterns of the earth, and the reaping of the bounty, the harvest of the earth, and the food has generated the staple food, and recognizing those patterns and year after year after year. So Zavi Java is kind of in that space that's connected to those mysteries. But also Virgo is in partnership with this star, Zavi Java, and there appears to be an intent of rising up beyond the boundaries of the physical realm to perceive the sacredness of the world around us. So there's a sense of like coming into and out of and getting that celestial perspective of the natural laws, of the rhythm, the currents of the earth. So this greater overarching pattern, relationship of the planet is really going to be paramount during this particular synodic cycle, this new synodic cycle of Mercury. So I may do a specific video about this, or just write a post about Mercury going direct, but that's since I'm talking about it here in this video. So if we can, so this is about harnessing our own personal sovereignty as it relates to being of service in the world. Again, we're talking about Virgo here, and how can we be of service and still be sovereign to ourselves, and at the same time bringing in what Libra had brought to us, or brought to Virgo, through being able to be in relationship in a healthy, conscious, equal partnership. All right, so this is the end of the video, and thank you all for being here. Please like and share this video and subscribe if you do. I would appreciate that a lot. It helps go to support me and more videos. I do have a Patreon page, in Spiral Nexus, so check that out if you want to support me even further, or go to my website, spiralnexus.com, where I do personal astrology readings, classes, events, astrocartography. And I'm also going to be teaching a really big zodiacal star webinar series with Caitlin Castell called The Magic and Mysteries of the Zodiacal Constellations. You can find that out at mystaralchemy.com. And if you go to turningtheages.com, I'm doing a whole in-person, on the land in Bisbee, Arizona, night sky cosmology workshop training, all about learning the stars, the history of astrology, where did it come from, what is our cosmology, and how do we know that we're at this time of the turning of the ages, plus much, much more, along with personal stars and so forth. So please definitely go and check that out if you want to learn more. And feel free to contact me with any questions, and or comment about this video, that astrological questions and so forth. I'm happy to answer and respond to that. I hope you all have a good rest of your day, and I will see you next time.